In 1932, the Public Health Service, working with the Tuskegee Institute, began a study to record the natural history of syphilis in hopes of justifying treatment programs for blacks. It was called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. The study initially involved 600 black men without the benefit of the patient's informed consent. In 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law. The law requires informed consent, communication of diagnosis, and accurate reporting of test results in human studies. Memories of medical exploitation is still a fresh wound in the African American community.
We found that there are still barriers, there's still fears, a general lack of faith in the healthcare community given the history of research on African Americans like Tuskegee. The key is to make informed decisions, not based on past history, but current evidence and relationship building.
There's great distrust of the medical system, as my partner Michael Holt likes to call it. But what was interesting, and race is a key factor as well, but what was interesting and what was one of the most promising things I heard in the focus groups was when we get past the sort of faceless medical system or the government or things like that, and we get on an individual level, what the people who shared their information with us told us was race becomes less important and trust can be developed. So when we asked them if they trust their physician, they said yes.
There's people that are leery about participating in clinical trials, or they heard misinformation about clinical trials, and you know, we'd like to have an opportunity to talk to those folks to say really what clinical trials are like, try to, you know, kind of ease some of those fears that they might have, because a lot of times a clinical trial is absolutely the best option that they can pursue.
I think that there hasn't been a major emphasis on the part of the medical community to include blacks. I think that when you hear about clinical trials, you never hear that a certain segment of any community is included. I think there's a reason for that kind of anonymity, but I also think if you want more participation from various ethnic groups, that you've got to go to those ethnic groups, and I have not seen that kind of effort being put forth.
I think that education, really in educating the community about the significance, about the positive effect of clinical trials and what can actually be achieved in medical advances and how different ethnic groups can be helped because of clinical trials outweighs the negative.
The clinical trials really at their essence is how we prove in medicine what works and what doesn't work. It's how we take an idea and decide if that idea is going to benefit people or not. And this is how medical research, all the advances in medical research that we enjoy today, whether it's antibiotics or vaccines or cancer treatments, this is how they come about, and this is how we prove that they're the right thing to do, is by doing clinical trials.
One of the reasons this project is important to specifically look at clinical trials in underserved communities, particularly in the African American community, is because of cancer disparities. We know, we have the data that across the country and right here in Milwaukee, we can pinpoint it, that there are worse outcomes for African American women compared to white women when it comes to breast cancer, African American men compared to white men when it comes to prostate cancer. And if we're going to be able to close that gap, to get better treatment and better outcomes to African American men and women suffering from cancer, we need to do the research. And so you can't do the research if there's no trust.
You know, when you're in a clinical trial, obviously it's spelled out as far as what that participation is going to look like. What treatments are you going to get, when you're going to get them, when there are going to be extra tests. So that's kind of all laid out on a calendar and discussed with the patients ahead of time. I think the other thing people realize that when they sign up for a clinical trial, that any day that they can wake up and they can say, you know what, this isn't for me, I don't like how it makes me feel, I'd rather just kind of pursue standard therapy or whatever, and they can opt out of a clinical trial at any time during their participation.
One thing that we're going to do is create new opportunities and make the most of the opportunities we have to connect Medical College of Wisconsin researchers and physicians with members of the community. But we're also going to, the churches have been very effective at reaching people in the past and in this project. And we're going to look for new ways to partner with these great church organizations that have really welcomed us and opened their doors to us and made this research possible.
Our best defense against ethical infractions is increased participation at every level. If minorities are not stakeholders in clinical trials, then their healthcare issues will remain understudied.